You grab your keys, you say goodbye, maybe you feel a little guilty about it, and you leave. And then your dog is alone. But what actually happens next? Not the version we tell ourselves. That they're fine, they're probably napping, they'll be okay. What actually psychologically, physiologically, behaviorally happens to your dog the moment you disappear? Because researchers have studied this with cameras, with cortisol tests, with heart rate monitors. And what they found is more complex, more emotional, and honestly more important than most owners realize. Stay with me, because understanding this is going to change how you leave and how you come back. Welcome back. Or if you're new here, this channel is about going deeper into the psychology of your dog. Not tricks, not basic obedience, the real inner life of the animal living in your home. Today we are talking about what dogs actually experience when you're not home. The emotional arc of their alone time, the behaviors most owners don't know about, what the research says about how dogs perceive your absence, and what you can do to make it better for them. This one is important. Let's get into it. The moment you leave, the first 15 minutes. The first thing you need to understand is that the hardest part of your absence for your dog is not the middle. It is not hour 3 or hour 5. It is the first 15 minutes after you walk out the door. Research from the University of London, led by animal behaviorist Dr. John Bradshaw, used cameras to track dog behavior during owner absence across multiple households. The finding was consistent. The most intense stress response, vocalization, pacing, destructive behavior, attempts to escape, clustered almost entirely in the first 15 to 30 minutes after departure. This is because your dog experiences something that behaviorists call departure distress. It is not simply missing you. It is the acute psychological shock of losing access to their primary attachment figure. Think about what that means. Not a gradual settling into loneliness, an immediate, high-intensity emotional response. For most dogs, this then plateaus. The nervous system, unable to sustain peak distress indefinitely, begins to regulate down. The dog moves into a quieter, more resigned state. But that first window is genuinely difficult for a significant portion of dogs, including many whose owners have no idea, because the dog appears perfectly fine at pickup. The evidence was in the cameras they never set up. What dogs actually do, the behavioral reality. Let's talk about the behaviors themselves, because most owners imagine their dog spending alone time doing one of two things: sleeping peacefully or destroying something. The reality is more varied and more revealing. Sleep is genuinely the dominant activity for many dogs during owner absence, but it is important to understand what kind of sleep it often is. Researchers note that dogs left alone frequently show fragmented, lighter sleep cycles compared to when their owner is home. The nervous system remains partially activated. They are resting, but they are not fully at ease. Patrolling is the second most common behavior captured on home cameras. Dogs walk the perimeter of the home repeatedly. They check windows, check doors, return to spots where the owner was last present. This is not random. This is a dog actively monitoring for your return. The behavior is driven by the same instinct that makes a pack member scan the horizon for a missing companion. Scent seeking is one of the most underreported behaviors, and one of the most psychologically significant. Dogs return to objects that carry your scent. Your side of the bed, your worn clothing, your chair. Studies have shown that the presence of owner-scented items measurably lowers cortisol in separated dogs. They are not just missing you abstractly. They are chemically, neurologically soothed by the trace of you that remains in the space. Vocalization, howling, barking, whining is the behavior most likely to cause problems with neighbors, but it is worth understanding what drives it. It is communicative in origin. Wolves howl to locate separated pack members. Your dog howling while alone is, at its root, a location call. They are trying to find you, and the silence that answers them is, in animal terms, deeply disorienting. Object carrying is something many owners chalk up to boredom or mischief, but a significant number of dogs pick up and carry items that belong to their owner during alone time. A shoe, a shirt, a leash. Behaviorally, this is a comfort behavior. They are not chewing it in most cases. They are just holding it, maintaining a physical connection to you through an object. Each of these behaviors is a window into an animal actively working to cope with your absence. The emotional arc, what your dog feels across the day. The psychology of a dog's alone time is not flat. It moves through distinct emotional phases, and understanding the arc matters. The departure phase is the peak intensity we already talked about. Acute distress, activated nervous system, maximum vocalization, and movement. This can last anywhere from 5 minutes to an hour, depending on the individual dog. The settling phase follows. The dog stops actively searching and begins to regulate. Sleep, patrolling, scent-seeking become the dominant behaviors. The emotional state is not contentment. Most researchers describe it as a low-level vigilant resignation, alert enough to respond to sounds or signals of your return, subdued enough to conserve energy. The anticipation phase is genuinely fascinating and not well known. Multiple studies have found that dogs appear to have a rough internal sense of when their owner is expected to return, based on routine, scent changes in the environment, and possibly subtle shifts in ambient sound patterns. Dogs have been shown to begin orienting toward the door and increasing alertness before their owner actually arrives. They are not psychic. They are exquisitely attuned to pattern. The reunion phase, the moment you walk in, is where all of that accumulated emotional experience discharges. The intensity of a dog's reunion behavior is not just about how happy they are. It is proportional to how much stress accumulated during the absence. A dog that goes absolutely frantic when you return has often been carrying significant emotional tension that is now releasing all at once. That explosion of energy at the door is not just love, it is relief. What the cortisol data tells us. Behavioral observation tells us a lot. But the physiological data tells us something that behaviors alone can miss. Cortisol is the primary stress hormone in dogs, just as in humans. Researchers have been able to measure cortisol levels in dogs during owner absence through saliva samples, and the results are sobering. A study published in Applied Animal Behavior Science found that cortisol levels in dogs left alone were significantly elevated compared to baseline. Not just in dogs diagnosed with separation anxiety, but in dogs that owners described as coping fine with being alone. This is the piece that should shift how we think about the question. We tend to evaluate whether our dog struggles with alone time based on whether they exhibit problem behaviors, destruction, vocalization, elimination. But cortisol data shows that a dog can have an elevated stress response while appearing behaviorally calm. They are not fine. They are suppressing. This does not mean every dog left alone is suffering acutely. Dogs vary enormously in their stress response and their capacity to self-regulate. But it does mean that the behavioral surface is not always the full picture. A dog that sits quietly while you're gone may still be experiencing meaningful physiological stress that accumulates over time. This matters for long-term health. Chronic cortisol elevation has documented impacts on immune function, digestion, and behavioral stability. The dog that seems fine today, left alone for 9 hours every weekday, is accumulating a biological cost that may show up much later. The separation anxiety spectrum. It's broader than you think. Here's something most owners don't realize. Separation anxiety is not a binary, it is a spectrum. At the severe end, the end most people picture when they hear the phrase, you have dogs that cannot be left alone at all. They injure themselves trying to escape. They destroy walls and doors. They cannot eat, cannot rest, cannot regulate in any way without their person present. This is a genuine clinical condition that requires veterinary and behavioral intervention. But that severe end represents a minority of dogs. The majority of dogs with separation-related issues sit somewhere in the middle of the spectrum. They are not destroying the house, but they are also not truly comfortable. They pace for 45 minutes before settling. They have loose stools on days when they're alone for a long time. They lose appetite. They bark intermittently. They show the subtle, physiological signs of chronic low-grade stress. These dogs often get missed entirely because they are functional, because they don't create problems the owner can see. Dr. Karen Overall, one of the leading veterinary behaviorists in the world, estimates that separation-related distress at some level affects a much larger proportion of the domestic dog population than clinical diagnosis captures. Many dogs simply don't have the language to tell us they're struggling, and many owners aren't watching closely enough to notice. What your dog actually needs when you're gone. Understanding the problem is only useful if it leads somewhere. So let's talk about what the research actually supports. Predictability is the most consistently supported intervention in the literature. Dogs that experience departure as part of a reliable, understood routine show lower cortisol and shorter distress windows than dogs for whom departure is unpredictable or emotionally charged. Keep your departure calm. Same cues, same routine, minimal drama. The long emotional goodbye that feels kind to you often amplifies the distress signal for them. Scent anchoring works. Leaving an item of worn clothing, something that carries your scent without being washed, has documented cortisol lowering effects. It is not a substitute for your presence, but it is physiologically real. Use it. Environmental enrichment during alone time, puzzle feeders, long-lasting chews, sniff mats does not eliminate stress, but it does provide a behavioral outlet and occupies the nervous system during the peak distress window. The first 30 minutes after you leave is when enrichment has its highest value. A midday break changes the physiological arc of a long absence significantly. Research consistently shows that dogs left alone for 4 hours with a break show substantially better behavioral and hormonal profiles than dogs left alone for 8 hours straight. If full-time work is your reality, a midday walk from a trusted person or professional is not a luxury. It is a welfare consideration. Avoid long emotional reunions immediately upon returning. This sounds counterintuitive, but dramatically intense reunions actually reinforce the departure reunion cycle as a high-stakes emotional event. Calm, warm, unhurried greetings regulate your dog's nervous system back to baseline more effectively than meeting their frantic energy with equal frantic energy. Your dog does not experience your absence the way you imagine. They do not sit by the window contentedly watching birds. They do not shrug it off and nap through the day unbothered. They go through a real emotional experience, with a beginning, a middle, and a peak of relief at the end when you finally walk back through that door. They carry the trace of you and scent when you're gone. They orient toward the door before you arrive. They catalog your return in their nervous system as the resolution of something that was unresolved all day, and then they greet you like you hung the moon. Understanding that it is not about guilt, it is about information, and information lets you do better by the animal that has organized their entire emotional world around you. If this connected with something, I have a video on why dogs follow you from room to room that goes deeper into the attachment piece behind all of this. It picks up exactly where today leaves off. Drop a comment telling me, do you have a camera at home? Have you ever watched what your dog actually does while you're gone? I want to know what you found. Subscribe if you haven't. New video every week, and I'll see you next time.